This Nikki Haley clip? Okay.
Yeah, this is good.
Here is Nikki Haley on Fox News with Bret Baier. And there's been, because of that clip with Bethany Mandel, lots of a good push, I'm in favor of it, to get conservatives to define wokeness. And a lot of them just don't really seem to have coherent definitions for what it actually is. But Nikki Haley is convinced that wokeness is the number one threat that we are facing right now.
And this is a big issue in the Republican primary as well, woke and wokeness, and what that means for families around the country. You're quoted saying wokeness is a virus more dangerous than any pandemic, hands down. So for those families who look at you saying that and say, I don't know if wokeness, this pandemic took my family member, what do you say to them?
Well, I have friends and family members. My sister-in-law died from COVID. So look, there's no one closer to it than our family, and we share that grief with all the other families. And that's the reason why I think we need to hold China accountable for exactly what they did to many families. But when you talk about wokeness, don't underestimate the dangers of what this is doing. The wokeness has caused so much damage to our children that we can't have that happen anymore. It is a plague that will impact them for the rest of their lives if we don't put a stop to it. It's dangerous. It's unhealthy. We're seeing it with anxiety and stress on our kids, and we've got to put an end to it.
Anxiety and stress. So lots there. We need to hold China accountable.
Yes.
Now, this is something to keep watching as the Biden administration gleefully moves us towards more belligerence with China because it helps him in his mind domestically, and also like the neocons have been pushing for a pivot to Asia for decades at this point. Wherever they draw the line in terms of hawkishness, which is now the reopening of military bases in the Philippines on the back door of China, the two deals that we've made with Australia to arm ourselves and have a presence there outside of China as well. Plus, just like, let's ban TikTok. China's
awful.
China is maybe the lab leak theory. Maybe it was a bioweapon. All of this stuff is one and the same.
Here,
yeah, she's connecting the general bipartisan consensus about let's ramp up things with China to COVID, which is going to be the right-wing angle for it. But like whatever the Biden administration is doing right now is incredibly short-sighted, because all it does is enable China hawkery on the right and makes it more and more extreme. That's a bit beside the point there.
I do want to touch on the this is schizophrenia on the part of the right and the anti sort of COVID folks, because simultaneously Nikki Haley would be like, we need to return to normal, let COVID go, Joe. And simultaneously saying, oh yeah, China made that as a bioweapon to attack us. So like, which is it? And the truth is they don't actually think that it is a bioweapon that China wanted to attack us. Although I do think even if they thought that, they would still tell American working people to go, maim themselves for a virus without, universal healthcare, for instance. But they just want to agitate against China.
Yeah. So that's her angle on it. But then like just the overall thesis there that wokeness was more dangerous than COVID. How many people died of COVID in this country?
Yeah, I like invoking my dead sister-in-law and be like, I do care about this. On the other hand, like, how many more sister-in-laws will die because of, wokeness?
Because of wokeness. So we'll never know.
Because their kids are reading Anti-Racist Baby in school.
Yeah, and that is just like an extra level of depravity there, that she's so willing to cast aside the death of her family member in order to inflate the danger of, critical race theory, black people having a place in society where they're able to talk about systemic racism, being accepting of gay and trans people, with the disease that literally killed her family member. That's the lengths that Republicans will go to.
And that's why she seems, I think, so uncomfortable to even kind of like, that's a hard pivot to make.
Yeah.
And it's one she should have known she was gonna have to make when she said it's worse than any pandemic. Just a really callous thing to say.
Could we watch the next clip after this one? Speaking of Bethany Mandel, her co-author of her book Stolen Youth, Carol Markowitz, who's a New York Post columnist.
Sure.
She was on Fox News with Fox's John Roberts, and I just wanted you guys to focus on what she's applying this definition of wokeness that she has to, specifically in terms of the use case.
Okay.
And what she says about it.
Let's go.
Youth is about how this is affecting even younger kids now. This lack of opinion and this really rigid forced conformity has come to our K through 12 spaces also. It used to be limited to woke college students, but now it's everywhere. And, I love that Whoopi's, finally aware of it and finally ready to fight back on it.
Sorry, to be clear, Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, well, they're obsessed with Whoopi Goldberg on the right for some reason.
So it used to be limited to woke college students, but now it's everywhere. And, I love that Whoopi's, finally aware of it and finally ready to fight back on it. But again, maybe they should start on their show.
In fact, I want to just read a quote from your book. This is call for number 4, if I could. Your take on wokeism's effect on children, where you say, quote, if they can make our children miserable, lead them to question every building block of society and rebuild their entire concept of reality, then the left and their woke indoctrinators will consider that a victory. Go into a bit more detail on that.
Look, this isn't the first time in history that a totalitarian, minority has risen up and tried to shut down the views of the majority. And that's what's going on in America today. You're only allowed to have certain opinions. You're only allowed to state them in a certain way. And that's what wokeness is. It's a leftism, but it's coupled with a very forced conformity that even people who are on the left feel that they need to abide by, like Whoopi Goldberg.
Oh.
So, we see this happening in all facets of society. Our book focuses a lot on what's happening with children, specifically in schools, at their pediatrician's office, in the library, and so on. But the win for me is raising resilient children who won't shout down a speaker at their college because they disagree. And that should be really the goal for a lot of us.
Good. That's good. She's going to raise children that have the right values, not shouting down college speakers, but also being pretty explicitly racist to her classmates.
I also just think it's
his.
That's just why I wanted to highlight it as a little bit of a surprise, in the sense of like, this also just goes to show you how flimsy and useless this idea or this sort of definition of wokeness is. Like, you're applying it to like Whoopi Goldberg at The View, an extremely rich celebrity being annoyed that like someone maybe said like you're not using the right pronouns or something like that. And then also the Stanford Law event, where when the actual video came out, the literal appointed Fifth Circuit judge was calling a student an appalling idiot and yelling at them,
calling them a teenager, and that's when the response of like, what are you, 92 or whatever, came back. In the sense of like this idea that like those two incidents validate or absolve her of like any sort of critique of their definition of wokeness, which Bethany Mandel could not actually muster in a live interview, is absurd. Well, and then at least this co-author here had a ton of time to come up with her definition. And when you find the definition, when you get to it from her, it is so broad that it's completely inscrutable. And then her entire complaint is that you can't say this because of wokeness, as she says it on Fox News. We're in that wokeness is now a part of cancel culture, and this is just a recycling of every conservative aggrievement talking point since, I've been following politics in my lifetime.
And Matt, didn't you also pull that quote one time from 1902 that was like, we can't say anything anymore? Like,
yeah, it was.
It's this idea of like sort of like, there's no, rhetorically, people can't say anything anymore. It's hundreds of years.
That was Matt found the old newspaper clipping of complaints that you couldn't say that Abe Lincoln was a descendant of monkeys anymore, right?
Yeah, it was the stinking PMC. At that point, it was the Democrats,
the wokesters,
Republicans, the stinking PMC Republicans who run all the newspapers were afraid to show a comparison of Abraham Lincoln's profile and and a ape's profile because of how similar the skull shapes were.
Yeah. So a tale of as old as time.
Phrenology.
The discourse has moved past their idiotic perspectives because of, the collection of knowledge. And then that's the same thing as persecution. And we've seen this before in history, she says. Woo! Well, we certainly have.
No,
not in the way that you're describing it.
I mean, Charles Murray used to do this too. Like, everyone's afraid to talk about this. No one can say these things, and then you actually look at the things, and it's like junk science, clearly racially motivated by a scam artist like Charles Murray, who's like posing as a scientist, and like people like Andrew Sullivan, a lot of the same people, laundering as like a sort of like beleaguered social scientist, when in fact he's just like a racist hack.